Well, I know we've already kind of opened this can of worms, but I definitely want to talk a little bit more about some of these tools for managing anxiety around sex. So, talk to us, if you would, about I guess, the dual stress and relaxation responses, and how that plays into our arousal and just our sexuality in general.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that back because, our human body has been an evolution and process since the beginning of our existence, right? And so we have a highly tuned stress and relaxation response in our body. Back in the old days, if we saw a bear, our body would go, eek, bear. And our heart rate would start beating fast. Our blood would start rushing to our limbs so that we could run or fight. And this was a good thing. And because we're such creative human beings, we have imagination. We could imagine if there's one bear, there might be two, right? So that's the anxious part of the stress response, is that, there's this one bear in front of me. I got to get ready to fight. And there could be a bear behind me. And I think we're pretty unique as humans, having this ability to what if a situation. I don't think other animals have that same ability, the what if. So having anxiety in a situation that's threatening or negative is not a terrible thing. Well, in modern days, we're not being chased by bears or whatever else. We're being chased by bills and work tasks and, families and who knows what else. And so what we've learned about the stress response is that it can be learned, and it can be anything that's negative can activate our stress response. And then what happens sometimes is, if that stress response is powerful enough, if we react to stress powerfully enough, that it can actually begin to hijack our ability to relax when we're stressed. So, if my kiddo comes around the corner and goes, boo, my first reaction is to get stressed, right? I'm going to jump. I'm going to be, and it goes straight to the back of my reptile brain, right? It goes straight there. And then my relaxation system, so the nervous system has your sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. The sympathetic system manages all our arousal, from this, just the arousal of being alive, the arousal of coming from sleep to wake, the arousal of something scaring us or something exciting us. So my kid comes around the corner and says, boo, and I feel scared, but my relaxation comes into play when I go, oh, that was my kiddo. That's not a bear. I'm okay. And I can relax. But the problem is that anxiety can hijack our stress system. So what we were finding out was, people coming back from war with PTSD, because the sympathetic nervous system manages arousal. Arousal and fear share similar symptoms. So, for instance, arousal sends our heart starts pounding, our blood starts flowing, but it goes to our genitalia instead of to our limbs, our hands and feet, because it's a different process. But they're similar. So what happens with folks with PTSD is that their heart starts racing because they're sexually aroused, but it reminds them or triggers their fear that they've experienced. And the sympathetic nervous system, the arousal just shoots up and bypasses sexual arousal, and they just go straight to fear. So some of that has to be unlearned, and it takes time. That was a lot.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is super fascinating to me, and I want to geek out on this kind of material all day while being mindful of the listeners. But it reminds me so much of a conversation we had last December, I believe, with Justin Sunseri, as we were talking about polyvagal theory and what we can learn about safety and how that impacts our sympathetic activation and just sort of our nervous system's arousal ratings. And so based on that conversation and others, I myself have always described sex as a form of mammalian play, as a way for us to sort of like practice in a safe environment and work out some of our fears. And I've always kind of imagined kink and BDSM as being maybe a somewhat like bolder expression of that same sexual play. How does that model line up with your thoughts here?
Yeah, mine are pretty close to yours, except I don't see kink and BDSM as being bolder. I just see them as being extensions of our possibilities for creative play. So for instance, one of my favorite things is sex and the disabled and sex and aging. Our bodies change. Our bodies can be impacted by and impact our ability to just have sex in a way that we might normally. So our ability to maintain intimacy through the lifespan depends on our ability to be creative and flexible. So yeah, I love the idea of mammalian play. It's a way to be intimate with somebody else, and it feels good, and we have the right to pleasure.
I love Christy's encyclopedic knowledge of all his prior episodes. That was nicely going all the way back to December and picking that up. I don't have to go very far back to have a question about something that was also previously brought up. And the reason I know that is because I'm the one who brought it up. So we had an episode a few months ago talking about how role play can be used in relationships, specifically different kinds of relationship dynamics. Now, I'm not a therapist, so I stopped short of talking about the effectiveness of role play in therapy. So it was interesting to hear you talk about mindfulness, but the idea of role play kind of being to get out of your own mind. So where do you see role play as possibly being effective in therapy for this?
Oh, role play, you're very much. I think role play, you're very much in the present with play. So when I think about any kind of role playing I've done, from sexual to regular, I'm very much embodied in whatever persona or character I want to take on, and that's beautiful play. And you can be very mindful in that moment. I guess I want to be clear. Yeah, I don't know. I want people to really enjoy their way of looking at intimacy, their way of being in this world, and to find pleasure in that. And yeah, I mean,
no, that's fine. I was just in my mind, I saw a separation between being mindful of you and the present and being role play, which is basically the exact opposite. To me, it seemed opposite, but I'm glad you were able to tie that in together to say that when you're role playing, you are absolutely in the moment. You are absolutely concentrating on what's going on right now. So that's good. Thank you.
No, I think you've made a really great point, Puck, because it does feel like you're out of your body in a certain way, you're out of your mind, you're out of your ego, maybe in a certain sense, because you're playing a character other than your own.
Right.
But that can actually make you feel more present, because you know, like you and I talked about in that discussion around some of those roles. If you don't have to be an adult, if you don't have to be a person in that moment, if you don't have to be yourself, if you don't have to be an employee, if you don't have to be a husband or a wife or whatever else, and can just be a sexual being or whatever character you are in that moment, then it makes it a lot easier to kind of leave some of that distraction, some of that anxiety producing distraction aside. And maybe empowers you to be more present in a way. So I think that sexual role play can actually be an incredible way of overcoming anxiety. And yeah, I guess I'll just kind of continue to stack up some of these past episodes. I don't mean to be too self-congratulatory, but if you are curious, if you missed out on any of the conversations that we're referencing here, and you feel like you need to bone up or catch up on some of these things, I'll make sure to have links to those things in the show notes for this episode. But I want to kind of hone in a little bit because we've been talking a lot about some of the like cultural beliefs and expectations, whether they're coming from a pulpit or GQ or wherever else. And I guess I wanted to ask Melissa if there are any particular beliefs or maybe even mantras that you would encourage us to like cling to as we're grappling with sexual anxiety.
Yes, and I wanted to thank you. You explained what you just said to Puck a minute ago was really a better way to say what I was thinking. And I love the idea of fantasies because we want to really help people tap into the creative sense of pleasure. So the mantra I would have is pleasure. We have the right to pleasure. We have the right to enjoy our sexual selves, to feel empowered in it, to find joy, to have it be as creative and as interesting as we want it to be. That's really the mantra. And I use a meditation by Gina Ogden that focuses on pleasure. I sometimes say this meditation over and over and over just to remind myself that my body is beautiful, my way of being sexy in this world is beautiful, and I have a right to it. And that's probably the biggest thing. And especially for mindfulness, it's really to help us get more to an authentic place, to be really present with our feelings, our needs, our sensations, and to be okay with that in the world.
Are there any beliefs or ideas that you would encourage us to maybe challenge or to cut out of our sex lives?
Yeah.
We'll do a whole episode on that where we'll reference back to this one at some point, I imagine. What are maybe some of the highlights here?
All right. Sex does not come in one size or for one body or for any gender. We can have sex any way that we possibly find pleasurable, and it's okay as long as it's consensual, right?
See, my mind goes straight to, I forget what rule number that is of the internet, where no matter what it is, some form of porn for it exists on there. So like my big thing would be like the idea that whatever you're interested, whatever arouses you, that it's okay. I mean, there's avenues and outlets for the safe outlets for that. And the idea was like, I shouldn't be turned on by something, whether it's as simple as a member of the same sex or some, which sometimes some people are taught that you're not supposed to be attracted to, but the idea that whatever you're attracted to, it's okay. There's probably a community for you out there.
Really casual of you to pretend that you don't remember Rule 34. Nobody's buying it, Puck.
I knew it existed. I forgot the actual number.
Oh my gosh, there's a Rule 34. I don't know. I think the main thing too is that we should look at and challenge where we get some of our sexual ideas from.
Yeah, like who told you you're not allowed to like that? Like where did you get this idea? Where did this come from?
Yeah.
Oh, my favorite is bumping uglies, right? Have you heard that term? Who decided that they're fucking ugly?
Yeah, fair to say, and also just doesn't entirely line up with my appreciation. I mean, I don't want to overstate it here, but yeah, I think that there's a lot of beauty there, and I think it just highlights a lot of what we've been discussing about, which is that there are a million different words for our genitals. There are a million different little euphemisms and phrases for how we describe sex. And I think that really speaks to the fact that we feel very uncomfortable saying penis. We feel uncomfortable saying a vulva or talking about sex and these different things. So we have to find these like cute little ways to avoid or to minimize sex by saying like, oh, it's just bumping uglies. Like it's just crude. It's just, ways of like dismissing our sexuality so that we can maybe distance ourselves because it makes us feel a little bit nervous. It makes us feel a little uncomfortable. And I I guess I want to say to everybody listening that whether you have listened to this and a million other sex podcasts and are kind of just like over it, and hearing about somebody coming in their underwear doesn't bother you at all, or if the hair on the back of your neck stood up a little bit when I use that kind of vulgar term, I want to say that it's okay. Like, your nervous system's response, like your reaction to any of this conversation is valid, but it's also something that is at least somewhat under your control. And with a little bit of effort and time and energy and some of the practices that we've been discussing here, by working with a sex therapist or whatever else that might look like for you, there's opportunity to change. I just have to stress, I'm a very anxious person by nature. I don't know how thoroughly that comes through the airwaves, but I think anybody who knows me knows that I'm a very kind of anxious person. And I was very much raised to find sex to be wrong, to be immoral, to be a little bit disgusting, to certainly be very private and confidential. And yet somehow I'm here with you good people talking about these things every week. And the journey, while very long and hard, thank you, wasn't maybe as complicated as you might imagine. And the tools and tricks and the opportunities that I had are things that I really hope exist for you who's listening, because there really is opportunity for change here.
Now, I wanted to bring a point. Christy made a great point. This brings me back to performance anxiety. So I don't know about you, but I hear a lot of people talk about how they don't, like there's anal bleaching and there's vaginal surgeries, right? So, or vulva surgery. And the thing is that people think that their genitalia is not pretty. And that's because we don't give...
This is without even acknowledging circumcision. Sorry to jump in here, but I feel like that needs to be highlighted as well here.
Yes, right. And the thing is that we're not allowed to talk about it. So we're not allowed to validate our genitalia. And so we have a bunch of people running around thinking that, oh gosh, I can't show this to anyone. And it's just the furthest from the truth. These are things that people have put in our head. These are ideas that we need to challenge. And so often in my work, I encourage people, look at your body. Just take a minute, get a mirror out and look, feel around and find ways to enjoy it, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, it looks like we hit a couple of sensitive spots for both. It's nice to see engaging in this. And the only thing I've got to add is that as often as I'm sitting here on a show called Secular Sexuality with two therapists, and even I will still get anxious about bringing up certain topics, right? I mean, it's even though it's the most comfortable atmosphere and I know that I am still, like you said, that little thing going up in the back of your neck saying, wait a second, am I supposed to feel this comfortable about this? This affects everyone. And I'm nervous every time I do a show too. I've learned a few tricks to at least disguise it, but I'm thankful that I'm able to discuss it with the people who share the experience with me. So I suppose I would just add that we're here to have conversations and on the various platforms that we have, and if continuing to have these or starting to have these conversations with us is going to be helpful for you, by gum, jump into the communities and join us.
Yeah, I cannot overstress the value of being in community and being willing to talk about your sex life. I mean, I'm not saying that you need to bore and bother all of your friends by telling them every detail of what you did last night, but I do think that it is not only appropriate, but healthy and perhaps even necessary oftentimes to cultivate the types of relationships where you can be discussing some of your experiences, some of your interests in these different kinds of things. But to that end, I don't want to get too far afield here because there's a lot that I really want to make sure we cover. And while we don't have time for all of it, I wanted Melissa to at least gently broach the subject of how to maybe support our partners if they are coping with a sex anxiety that maybe we don't share or maybe don't relate to.
Yeah, that's a tough one. There's some varied responses, but the first one that I think that I deal with the most is the minute a person with a penis struggles with an erection, and the partner's like, eek, you don't love me, you don't want me, you're not attracted to me. That's not the way to look at whether penis is having an erection or not. So we want to be supportive and curious. We want to also not make a big deal about how our bodies perform sometimes. We know that our body goes through aging processes, that stress impacts our body, that some bodies are different than other bodies. And so the more acceptance and education and understanding we can have around our partner's sexualities, that can do a lot to support any anxiety around it.
Yeah, we might be tempted to overeat or to eat past the point of being full when we're eating something that we really, really enjoy. And so I think that there's this like similar expectation that if I'm sexy enough, that my partner's erection is going to be reflecting of that. And, that's not entirely untrue, but it's also the case that the food can be absolutely delicious. And maybe you just ate. Maybe you're anxious. Maybe something happened at work today, or maybe you just don't want to eat right now. And all of that is valid. Maybe you even want to eat, but for whatever reason, you go to open your mouth and it tastes good, but you just don't have an appetite. And all of that is entirely valid. And it's certainly not the case for any non-penis havers out there that a erection is like representative of arousal or desire or interest or any of these other measures that we might be looking at.
Oh, I love that you said that because, when I was working on a book about sexual anxiety, I read a lot of research on understanding and defining the constructs for desire and arousal. And what we found was that not only did the scientists have a problem over time measuring arousal, people who were experiencing arousal had different ways of expressing it and sometimes didn't understand what it was. So, a thing that we'll see sometimes is heterosexual couple get together and the woman will say, oh, I love you, I desire you, I want you. And her vagina will be dry. And so the partner's like, are you sure you really want me? Because your body's not responding the way it should. And so erections and our physiological response to arousal is not the only tell for whether we are attracted and desire someone. And so being able to listen and to connect with our partner and to have that kind of education and understanding, it's not easy, right? It's not easy.
Yeah, and that's pretty much one of the common themes that I've been hearing throughout the whole episode, which is basically the Puck sits back and absorbs and learns episode, because a lot of this was out of my depth. But the idea that like this is not something that's going to be solved quickly. This is something that takes a good amount of time and dedicated effort. So thank you for making sure you put that in there.
I'm apologetic for our sex education system. I think that just some basic education would help clear up a lot of anxiety around sex.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that that's fair to say. And, it feels a little silly that that nonprofits like us have to kind of step in to fill in the gap in a lot of ways. So with that in mind, let me see if we can rifle through some of these questions as we're getting a little long on time. I guess I wanted to ask if you had any advice on how to find a good sex-positive provider or any type of professional that might be of assistance around these issues.
Yes. Well, I'm the direct person. So what I really coach people to do is call a therapist and ask for a few minutes of their time and just say, hey, how do you feel about working with someone who's kinky, who's into, furries or littles or, whatever else, right? And just noticing their response. And if you feel like they're responding in a way that goes, oh yeah, totally supportive, or I know a lot, or I don't know a lot, but I'm totally supportive, then you'll know right away before even going in that whether or not that person is for you. But sometimes what I find is that the relationship matters the most when it comes to therapy. So just being able to talk to someone on the phone sometimes is really the best idea. You get a feel of their temperament, of the way they approach things. I tend to be very strength-based, and I also now put in a lot of modern analysis. My therapy tends to ask a lot of questions. Some people don't like that. Some people want a specific kind of therapy. So sometimes that takes time to figure out.
Yeah, I can hear that. Well, are there any particular resources, books, podcasts, or anything else that you'd like to recommend to us here?
I was thinking about it before the show, and I can't believe just how much I read and how much I'm aware of. But I can tell you that books that have recently changed my brain is Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski, which I think is, repetitive. I don't know how to do this. There you go. But brilliant and based on research that is really current and fresh. And she does a great job of really trying to put it into an easy to understand way. She talks about responsive sexuality versus spontaneous, which I think is a big learn for a lot of people, and especially for sexual empowerment. Lori Brotto is another one that I think is amazing. Better Sex Through Mindfulness. I think she's got other books, but she really is, I think, the first to really combine in a book sex and mindfulness. You have like MBSR, which talks about mindfulness from a psychological point of view, but we're really incorporating it into sex more. The New Male Sexuality is a book I like for penises, and I also like The Guide to Getting It On and Girl Sex 101. These are great books, I think, too. I could go on.
Yeah, well, and for, as I like to say, folks who are listening to this podcast as they are driving around or jogging through the park, I will make sure to have some links and some details on all of this on the show notes for this episode.